Hello everyone, welcome back to this episode of SNEED-CAST. I'm your host Alexa, I'm here with Q, and we're welcoming back Jessica Infante, who happens to be Brewbound's managing editor. So hello Jessica, thank you so much for coming back on the show.
Hey guys, thanks so much for having me. It's great to be with you.
Of course.
Yeah, thanks so much. I feel like we always bug you, like once every other month, and you are so nice. So thank you so much. Well, I guess we can just get started off, and this will be kind of a fun is a one word for it, but the biggest thing it seems like going on in everything is tariffs. Whenever I was reaching out to kind of discuss this, like us talking about this, like you made a funny thing of like, well, this is so on and off, like I don't know what's going on with it. So I guess we can start there. Are these tariffs going into place right now, or is it just more and more of this weird will they, won't they type game?
So there's two different sets of tariffs right now. The aluminum and steel tariffs did go into effect, which I think is definitely what we're going to get into. Those other tariffs on, I think it started with being goods imported from Canada and Mexico and seems to have ballooned to include things from the EU. Those are supposedly going into effect on Wednesday, April 2nd. We're talking today on Monday, March 31st. But as we've seen, for the past 2 months in a row, like the Trump administration picks a day and then at the 11th hour they change their minds and then those tariffs are held off. So I hate to say we'll see, but I guess we will see. But we do certainly know a little bit more about the steel and aluminum tariffs, which have a big impact for brewers.
For sure. And to kind of touch on that, so going back to Trump's first term, so they did, implement a 10% aluminum tariff. It was only in effect for about a year with a changeover. Was there enough data on that to kind of give an idea of how that, impacted the craft or a craft brewer or a craft a brewing world?
Yeah, for sure. So those the Section 232 tariffs went into effect, and they did have a few carve outs for certain countries, like including Canada. Canada is probably our biggest aluminum trading partner, but they did stay in effect. The problem was uh, the tariff rate was applied across the board, whether or not the aluminum being involved needed to have a tariff or not. So prices just went up. But I know the original intent was to make sure that we upped production on this side of the border. That never really happened. The only thing, though, is there is this massive disruption, which was the pandemic. Like during the pandemic, any of the beer that would have been consumed in the bars and restaurants that all had to close down in 2020 shifted to cans. And then there was a scramble to produce enough cans because it wasn't just beer that went through this, it was stuff like soda and seltzer and water and all of these drinks that people were usually consuming out and about, they now had to consume at home. And at least in beer, the far preferred vessel for home consumption is a can. So we saw a lot happening. Ball is the world's largest manufacturer of aluminum beverage cans. They announced big plans to ramp up production and new plants. And since then, things have been really volatile, where they've either closed some facilities, and some of those facilities that they closed were very old and they were scheduled to be closed anyway. But they've also backed off from plans to open new plants. So I think it had just been really hard to predict. So you had 2020, and then the other thing that happened that really affected how to know how many cans, the country would need happened in 2023 with, I know we've touched on this before, but that conservative-led boycott of Bud Light really affected, Bud AB is a huge client of Ball's, and that really affected what they needed from Ball and how Ball needed to plan. So there've been a lot of up and down in terms of the supply of cans, what people need. And I don't know that the tariffs have really done anything to make sure that we are, making all the aluminum that we need here on this side of the border.
And then touching on the inconsistency, and since we mentioned the tariffs are so on and off, how is it the craft brewers are really dealing with like all of those inconsistencies?
That's a great question. So unfortunately, craft brewers are really used to this. And I feel like they're all exhausted. But, in 2021, Ball, the world's biggest manufacturer of aluminum beverage cans, announced a new policy that had a minimum order quantity of about 1 million cans per design. So like per beer. It's not like if, brewery A needs to put in their can order for the year and they need a million cans. It's no, like, Brewery A's beer number 1 needs to get a million cans. Beer number 2 needs to get a million cans. And that really put a lot of them into quite, it created quite a tizzy in the industry. I want to say it was just before Thanksgiving in 2021. And they were all trying to figure out what else to do, finding smaller brokers, and all of that's possible. But that's a lot more expensive. However, Ball backed off of that plan. So there's just been so much up and down in what is necessary to operate that brewers are, I'd assume a lot of them are kind of just exhausted at this.
So a million cans per can design. Given that we're talking about craft breweries, that seems like a crazy thing to ask them. Was that
Crazy, crazy, crazy. And so what had happened in the immediate aftermath of that was that a lot of other, small brokers, like, smaller companies that buy cans, blank cans in bulk, then they can decorate them on their own. A lot of them stepped up to fill the void, but that's, again, more expensive. However, I'm not really sure what happened, but Ball backed off this, and that's no longer the policy.
Well, that's great. I guess, and playing into that, and with the craft brewers, with someone like AB, a massive place, they can kind of eat this cost, and granted, it hurts them some, but not nearly as much as the craft brewers. Have you talked to any of them who have been kind of expressing like, I don't know what to do here? It seems like a impossibility for them in some ways.
A lot of brewers are saying that unfortunately they're just going to have to pass this cost on to their consumers because there really isn't any other way to do it. Their margins are so small and there aren't really options. It's not like you can just very easily call a bottling line manufacturer and say, hey, just kidding, we want to go back to bottles. Most of them don't even have bottling lines anymore. So I think you can definitely expect to see the price of craft beer go up.
So given that you touch on it a little bit with the sweeping, like tariffs, a big reaction has been certainly within, like Canada, a pulling off American-made, drinks, especially beer, and that's a scary thing for these, for like American, like brewers. What has the reaction been to that, and is it more of a understanding, or is it kind of varied throughout the industry?
So I would say the reaction is mostly understanding and concern, like you said. But the thing that I've heard that brewers, at least in my neck of the woods up here in New England, are most concerned about is a decrease in tourism from Canadian visitors, because they have all been, I feel like a lot of Canadian leaders have been very vocal about saying, like, if you were planning on going to Maine, don't do that this year. Yeah. I know Florida has been mentioned. But one thing that we've heard particularly up here, I was earlier this month, I was at the New England Craft Brew Summit, which is hosted by the Maine Brewers Guild. My teammate Zoe Licata interviewed the Maine Brewers Guild director, Sarah Bryan, for our podcast. And she said she's very concerned and her members are very concerned they're going to have a serious drop in summer tourism due to Canadians not coming to visit the way they usually do.
And that plays into into our last talk where we were discussing like on-premise purchasing is so important to grow the off-premise. So I hadn't really thought of that. That's really scary. So this is mostly like New England based, but I'm sure no one's coming to Texas from Canada either. That's not great.
They might be. But yeah, particularly in Maine, I think their summer tourism business, at least what I've heard from people who own breweries up there, has been declining the last few years. And there's such a seasonal business to begin with that when your busy season is becoming less busy, you're probably not building it back up in the slower times either.
And then shifting the conversation a little bit, Jessica, I know that there's been talk here in the office about small can formats. What is it that's making that so appealing?
So I love small cans. I think this is adorable. I wish everybody would put their products in, 8-ounce cans, but this is coming from a 40-year-old lady with a toddler that likes to wake up at 5 a.m. So I'm not really drinking as much beer as I used to. So I would love to have a little halfer, but the biggest mover in this space lately is New Belgium. They've branded them as mini rippers, which is clever, I think. And they've put their Voodoo Ranger Juice Force and Tropic Force into these 8-ounce mini ripper cans. Now these are 9.5% ABV beers. They're very, very strong. And my teammates had caught up with their CEO Sean Belangi a couple months ago, and he explained that they're hoping that the mini rippers can create new occasions for the beers because the fastest growing package size in craft beer is still 19.2-ounce singles. And these are like the bread and butter for the Voodoo Ranger family. But those packages still have like a time and a place. I think what Sean had kind of said was they imagine like a group of friends getting ready to head out for the night. And the last round before everybody leaves the pregame party is a mini ripper. So they obviously have something very clear in mind. But I mean, I think this would be great. I know out of Chicago, Hopewell used to do something called Little Buddies, which were like little 8-ounce cans of like just like a really nice classic lager. I think they still make them, but I would love to see more of them. But I don't know if we will because it's a specialty format, so it's probably even more expensive than any other standard can size.
Yeah, and playing into that, I mean, you can, I was gonna ask you, is it kind of a fad or something? Because it also seems like it's a lot to switch your production line to, switching to all small cans. You have to change your fill time and all that. It seems like this is, while it's cool for now, is it going to continue to be a niche thing, or could we be seeing every single can now as a small or a format can?
So I would love that world, but I think this is going to be pretty niche.
That sounds about right. And then I guess is it mostly because are like are or like are there certain beer styles that are more well suited for this? Like a darker beer is what I'm imagining. Just because if you hand me a 10.8%, give me it in a small can, and that sounds lovely.
Right? Yeah, I think you're absolutely like right on the bullseye with that. I think anything with a higher ABV is a perfect candidate to be put into a smaller can because we do know that people are leaning into moderation these days. They're really embracing either not drinking at all. I know like legal drinking age Gen Z drinkers are into what they call zebra striping, which is like one full strength drink, one non-alc drink, one full strength drink. I think this is a perfect way to thread that needle where you can give people these, higher octane, higher ABV beer styles that frankly are still very trendy, but you put it in a smaller package size and they're not having to drink nearly 20 ounces of it. I know that 19.2-ounce cans are really popular, particularly for these, double, triple imperial IPAs and hazy IPAs. I personally could never, but clearly people do.
Yeah, of course people do, and I'm the same as you, and I feel like I've gone in the same path where like give me a smaller can for this. Like I recently went to a place where they had a black pilsner, which I had never had before, and I was like, like it was still light and smooth, but it would have been better in a smaller can. But maybe that's just because I've been like reading about this stuff, and maybe I brainwashed myself. But it just seems like these smaller format cans are just it makes my hand feel bigger. That's nice, So like that is cool. But I guess Alexa, you're not really a beer drinker. If I hand you a small format can, at the very least, you would be like, oh, this is kind of cute, right?
So the thing about it is like, again, since I'm not a beer drinker, if you were to hand me like a small format can, first thing that's going to come to mind is like, thank God I don't have to drink that much of it. No offense to any of our craft brewers out there.
I personally love when a brewery offers a half pour because I don't always want an entire pint of something. My mom was up visiting this weekend and we went to a brewery and it's like, we're going out for dinner. I don't need to, go heavy on the beers for right now. I would just love a half pour of, I believe it was their rice lager, and it was delicious.
That's awesome. And so, I guess is this pitched as in or in any way like within the marketing rooms of these breweries? Is it pitched as a Gen Z style? And take your time. Is it pitched as a Gen Z style marketing pitch, or is it more just, hey, this makes sense right now?
So the person that I often hear advocating for small format cans is Lester Jones. He is the chief economist and VP of analytics at the National Beer Wholesalers Association. Super, super smart, easily like one of the sharpest minds in the industry for sure. And Lester loves to point out that, a group that is often ignored by, most brands in marketing is baby boomers who have a lot of disposable income, a lot more time on their hands, And a lot of them like to drink. They haven't really adopted these notions of moderation that younger, generations have. So he points out that, like, hey, maybe they would like smaller cans because, well, I mean, they are getting older and, maybe that's a good option for them. So, like, I can totally see it being something that would appeal to LDA Gen Zers, but I can also see it appealing to boomers. So, really kind of threads the needle both ways. One thing that I do think it's important to keep an eye on, also from New Belgium, in terms of really attracting Gen Z, is a new product that they've launched this year called Light Strike. I don't know if you guys have come across it at all. So Light Strike, it's, when we got the press release about it, I was like, this could not be any more not for me. But it is a hard refresher. So it's not a beer, but it's not a hard seltzer. It's meant to mimic a sports drink, basically. It's like hard Gatorade. Think of it that way. 5% ABV, not carbonated, which is a huge deal for younger drinkers. They really do not like bubbles. So there've been a few offerings that have come out lately. We could talk about that in a second, but back to Light Strike just for a minute. It's got sea salt, coconut water, and it comes in resealable plastic bottles, like literally just like Gatorade. So this to me is like one of the first new products we've seen to be completely designed with Gen Z drinkers in mind. And it'll be really interesting to me to see what happens.
Yeah, that's Light Strike. That's
Yeah.
I mean, I guess the plastic sealable bottle is so huge just because that's where everything's going. I mean, like in like the non-beer world, us in packaging, like everything is just like sustainability, and it's like they're drilling you over the head with it. So anything to like those resealable bottles will be huge.
But I think it's interesting in the sense that, like, in all of the conversations that we've had so far about the craft brewing space, I don't think you guys have ever mentioned like plastic packaging, specifically, I don't know, within this space for this product.
That has a lot to do with beer and the way it has to be stored. I guess with Light Strike, the nice thing about this is just fruit punch with alcohol, which is
Yeah, well, so it's not carbonated. You don't have to worry about it going flat because it's already flat.
it's already flat, yeah. And then I guess we'll just keep like going on. Overall health of the craft beer world. I've seen some stuff. It seems like not same old story, but the same news of things aren't going too great right now. Is that a fair assessment?
It's bad. Like I hate to be all doom and gloom, but I took a look at off-premise scan data from Circana through the end of February. Off-premise beer sales were down 2.7%, which probably doesn't sound too terrible. But prior growth drivers, things that have done really well for beer lately, mainly imports and then flavored malt beverages, which is stuff like Mike's Hard Lemonade, Twisted Tea, Smirnoff Ice. Imports are down and FMBs are flat. And that is really bad news because those things really had kind of been buoying the category. And without those bright spots, it doesn't bode well. So we'll see. I know the imports are like vastly Mexican imports, which are mostly all coming from one company, Constellation Brands. They own the brand rights to produce and sell Modelo, Corona, Pacifico, and Victoria in the US. And we can go down this rabbit hole a little bit if you guys are curious, but those brands are all under a parent umbrella that's called Grupo Modelo, and Anheuser-Busch completed the sale. They owned half of that company. They bought the rest of it in 2008, I believe, made moves to begin to do that. No, I'm sorry. 2008 was the InBev sale. So AB InBev, I want to say, started making moves to complete their transaction of Grupo Modelo in 2012. And the Department of Justice said, like, you can't, like, this would give you a monopoly on American beer sales. So they divested of those brands to Constellation Brands, who now makes and sells them for the US. And they have come out and said, like, they've got options for what to do if tariffs start to affect them, because tariffs would affect them if we do have tariffs on goods coming in from Mexico. But another thing that I have seen a lot of Wall Street analysts say is that their prime consumers, or mostly the Hispanic community, are really not coming out and shopping lately. So their sales are really going to be hurting on two different ends due to, things coming out of this administration. So that'll be really interesting to see what happens with them, because they really have been like the growth driver of the entire beer industry lately.
And then
So that's off premise. On premise, stuff's bad too. I'm sorry. We got a report recently from a company called Beer Board. They track draft sales, and St. Patrick's Day was very disappointing. I want to say draft volume was down almost 13%, and this was not just for St. Patrick's Day. The day it was, I think they grouped together 4 days, the Friday through to the Monday, and they compared it to last year's St. Patrick's Day, which was a Sunday. So they did like a Thursday to Sunday compared to a Friday to Monday. And I think the biggest problem that we really kind of saw in the numbers was that in 2023, St. Patrick's Day was on a Friday, which was also the Friday that kicked off March Madness. And so all of these things aligned, and the news was great. Draft sales were up 20%, but last year that bump kind of evaporated and it went back down to what had been the baseline before. But this year, draft sales declined quite a bit. So the second Beer Board report we got after the first weekend of March Madness was a little bit better. It showed that draft had increased over St. Patrick's Day weekend, but was still down compared to last year. I don't really know what this is about. I don't know if people just want to stay home. I don't know if, because we've also seen data from CGA, which is an on-premise data firm owned by NIQ, which is formerly Nielsen. And they recently came out and said that beer took share from wine and spirits at bars and restaurants. So that's something. But it's just, kind of hard to know what's happening. There's a lot of noise in all these numbers.
Yeah. And then I guess maybe something that could help out a bit is something that I saw is direct DTC shipping, which is direct to direct to consumer. Now, states are looking at legalizing this. This was something that wasn't allowed for beer previously. Is that correct, or still is in many states, right?
So there's only a few states where it's totally allowed. So there's a couple. The thing is, you got to look. It's interesting to me that beer and wine did it differently, but basically DTC shipping has been allowed for the wine industry for like over 20 years. And it's funny to me that states didn't just give it to beer at the same time, but they didn't. And, like the wine industry really worked on this for a very long time. And there's a lot of things that are different about beer and wine. The first one being that wineries are kind of geographically concentrated, so if you go on vacation to Napa and you visit a winery and you love their stuff and you want to have it shipped to you, you usually probably can do that. Beer wasn't necessarily that way. In terms of breweries are just all spread out. There are pushes in various states to really legalize this, and there are some states where it is totally allowed, but it could help. The thing is, like, it's expensive. Beer is really heavy to ship, and you don't get markups on beer the way you do for wine. So I think there's some cases where DTC shipments could really be a huge boon. Think of a brewer that like really specializes in very like high ABV barrel aged stouts and stuff like that, stuff that they sell in bottles that are much more like wine. I think that is somebody who would be a great candidate to really make a lot of money through this. But if you're just shipping a 4% lager in the mail, I don't know that you're going to get the returns that you would need for it to really, make it worth your while to do all of that. But it's a great way to see, where your customers are and learn a lot more. It gives you like really great data that you wouldn't get otherwise, like when breweries had started doing home delivery during the pandemic, I spoke to a lot of brewers who said like, this has been amazing for us because I see like at a zip code level, like where my fans are and what they like to drink and how much they like to buy and what their buying patterns are. So there's a lot that could help, but it's also a very expensive thing to do. One thing that at the Brewers Association, which is the trade group that represents the small craft brewers, something they've been working on for years in Washington is to, they support a bill that would allow the U.S. Postal Service to carry alcohol only in states where it's allowed. And this would potentially really help because, right now UPS and FedEx and what's the other one? I want to say THC, but that's not right. DHL. Sorry, this is mom brain.
You're good.
mom brain on acronyms. So those private carriers, they can do all of this, but they don't go everywhere. So if you lived in a really like rural, remote place, like I could see having the ability of the post office to mail you beer from a brewery that you really like. I could see that being great. The thing that's the reason this is never really probably going to happen at any large level is the beer wholesalers have a very vested interest in making sure that they have to be the ones that are selling the beer. So they are really entrenched. They have really great, lobbying communications and tight relationships with lawmakers. So it's tough because it's funny to see like the way the trade groups all work is like they all collectively they call themselves Team Beer together, which is really nice. But issues like this are where they do kind of butt heads with each other. So we'll see. I mean, the MBWA, the Beer Wholesalers Association, has always been very vocal on they do not believe that the postal service should be carrying alcohol. They really believe that their members, like their wholesalers, should be the ones who are selling this in their own individual markets. I don't know. The other thing though is like think about like the breweries that I mentioned before, like somebody with like a really nice, like high ABV barrel-aged stout that comes in a beautiful bottle. Wholesalers don't really want to carry those. Those are a lot of work and they're not really going to be sold in any kind of volume. So you'd have to say like, well, there is, this could benefit the brewers and it benefits the wholesalers by being something they don't have to carry on their trucks. I don't know what the answer is, but it's something that continues to evolve on a state-by-state basis.
Yeah, I think the thing where, in my mind, it seemed like a great idea is that if you have someone like St. Arnold's makes Pumpkinator and they do it once a year and it's a whole event and it's like and they also sell it in 750 bottles, so it's like it's truly like a bottle of wine. So that's where you can kind of play that game. And to me, I or my armchair executive says, all right, well, how about we just make this a big marketing event? And then you bring everyone in where it's just to me, because I like whenever I went to Boston, I had a Shipyard pumpkin ale. And while I can find it here in Houston, I have to drive around sometimes. I would love to just ship it straight to me. So that's where I think that could work, but far be it from me to say, like what could work.
Yeah, it would totally make sense for those like niche seasonal beers, like so that you're going to be able to get it. But I mean, we'll see. I don't think that Texas is keen to expand many alcohol privileges. So it could happen, but you also have a friend in New England who can just mail you beer too.
It's true. Well, I will probably take advantage of that because the one time I went to Boston, I was like, "This is beer heaven. This is awesome," and I can't get it here and Houston.
And then something else that popped up on our radar recently is the call for warning labels to potentially be placed on alcoholic beverages. How is it that the beer industry is reacting to that?
So yeah, we've gone through a wild couple of months with regard to alcohol and health, right? That was, a call that came from the former Surgeon General, and the call came, I think it was after New Year's, but before the inauguration when he knew he was going to be out of a job. So I think everybody has just kind of said, oh, that was interesting, but that's not going to happen. And that would have to be done through, I believe, an act of Congress. So I think everybody just kind of accepts that this will not happen. But the thing is that this has elevated this conversation about alcohol and health to like the national level. And maybe people who had never considered these things before are finally hearing about them. So it will be really interesting to see what happens in terms of consumers. Like there's the Surgeon General, the former Surgeon General's warning, there's that. But we're also right in the middle of every 5 years, the government, appoints an agency to revisit our dietary guidelines, like the food pyramid. And sometimes alcohol is part of this conversation. Sometimes it's not. It came up 5 years ago, and the committee was considering dropping daily limits to 1 drink a day for men. And I don't know if they would go to 0 drinks a day for women, but that didn't happen. And the levels remained in place, which is 2 drinks a day for men and 1 drink a day for women. The current iteration of that committee is going through their stuff right now, and there have been 2 different studies about alcohol. And one the alcohol industry was okay with. It's from the National Academy of Sciences, which is usually part of this process. The other study that was commissioned is from the the interagency coordinating the prevention of underage drinking. That's not exactly its full name. Its acronym is ICPUD, which just sounds gross.
Yeah.
But right. And this is something that the industry, like, really, across beer, wine, spirits, everybody really kind of rose up together and said, why is this agency participating in this process? They've never done it before. They're about the prevention of underage drinking. What does that have to do with adults? And I understand those questions, but, both sets released their studies around the holidays. The first study that came out said, like the highlight was moderate drinkers they have the same risk of general morbidity as non-drinkers. So basically, like, what people took away from this was like, hey, great, like, it doesn't make a difference. But if you read a little further into that study, one thing that it found pretty conclusively was that alcohol creates a 10% higher risk of breast cancer, which is something that I had never heard. And the more I read about it, the more I was like, I don't know how I've missed this, because I've been in and around alcohol forever. And I'm also a woman who needs to be concerned about diseases like this. The second study that came out from the ICPUD group, I think it quoted the rate of risk of breast cancer even higher. So it's just been interesting to me to see how these things get talked about, because most of the press that came out about the first study was like, great news, everybody. And I read a little bit further and I said, this is not good news, for like half of us. So the thing is, like, these conversations now happen at a much higher level, and it's really crossing the minds of different consumers, probably in ways that it hadn't before. So we will see, but I think we can all probably rest assured that cancer warning labels are not coming to beer bottles and cans anytime soon.
That's good news for the beer world. My last question is, and this is just off the cuff, what's a good spring beer that you've had so far, and what are you looking for?
Ooh, that's a great question. Like a spring seasonal, or just like, what do I like to drink in the spring?
Spring seasonal. I'd be interested to hear about.
Oh man. Well, I mean, right now we've actually gotten into summer, so that's wild. Oberon, can't beat it. Bell's. They've also created a couple different variations of it this year. My coworkers went out to Kalamazoo, Michigan to go to Oberon Day last week. I did not go. I thought about it, but I could not justify doing all the things that I, as a working mom, need to do to travel for work, which is, it's, find a babysitter to take my daughter to daycare, pack all of her stuff, do all these things. And I was like, I can't do that to just go drink beer in Kalamazoo, Michigan. But I would say that one, Jack's Abbey, I don't know if they've had it in the last year, but Jack's Abbey up here in Massachusetts made this great seasonal with lemongrass. I can't think of what it's called, but it was really, really good.
That's good to know.
So I keep an eye out for stuff like that. But I'm an easy bird. I just really love like a nice crisp Helles.
Blame me one bit. That's what I've been doing, recently. So yeah. But that's all we have, Jessica. Thanks so much for being with us. As always, you bring us great, information. I always learn something new, and I guess I'll have to go find some Light Strike and go get drunk on Gatorade or something. I don't know. We'll see.
Please report back, because I probably am not going to try it myself.
I'll be the pig, I guess. So that's fair.
I'll give it a go, maybe.
Oh, yes,
since
exactly.
I'm not in the whole craft brew space and not into drinking beer, so I'll give it a go.
All right. Well, thank you. All right. Thanks so much, Jessica.